line who's a sports agent, a nonprofit founder of the movement We're All a Little Crazy, #SameHere. And so Shauna and I are going to talk a little bit today. It's going to be a very fluid, easy conversation. We'd love to have you give us your insight, so be prepared to use the chat functions and or I think it's *6 to unmute your phone if you have a question. And we're going to have a really good session today. So Shauna, do you mind giving us a little bit about how you and Eric got to know each other? Because I am the lucky recipient of a friendship with Eric because of you. So
yeah.
there she is.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining today. Yeah, exactly. No, thank you everybody for joining. Mental health is personally a space that I'm very passionate about because of my, whether it's my own story or others I know. I am very fortunate to know Eric. We go back a while before I was at the agency that I just moved on from. I worked in the NBA family, and Eric and I crossed paths then. And I don't exactly know what it was. I think I just saw in the last several years, saw his, the activity he was doing. And again, because of my own, struggles with anxiety, it's obviously a space that I care a lot about. And I just respect Eric so much, professionally, as a human being. And I couldn't be more excited and grateful that he's joining us on this call today. Last thing I'll say is that, I think that why this is so relevant is, whether it was from my own background as an athlete and transitioning into, being an adult and trying to figure out how to have a job and all those things. And then, throughout my career, there's definitely times where working with your mind, and building tools along the way to help yourself becomes so important. And so, we're all human, and we all, I think at times we all suffer a little bit similarly. So, just being able to, for you guys to be exposed to Eric and his message, I think just has the potential to have such a huge impact. So Eric, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your friendship and all that you're doing in this space. Thank you.
No, thank you. I apologize that I'm not there visually for everyone, although I think that the vision of you two there is probably a lot more attractive than me being up there, so it probably is better for everybody else. You guys tell me where to go from this. Obviously, I'd love to, share how I met Shauna as well, and then the introduction there, and
that'd be
go
great.
into a little.
Yeah, tell us a little bit
great.
about how you and Shauna got connected, and we'd love to hear a little bit of your story too. I know there's a lot to it, so we'll look forward to that and giving people a chance to kind of react to it for sure. But how did you and Shauna get to know each other? That's our first question.
Yeah, no, for sure. So it's fascinating. Going into a little more detail than Shauna shared is, so my first job at a college was at the NBA league office. And don't make it seem like that's such an amazing thing that happened. I was also rejected by the NHL, NBA, and Major League Baseball. So I'd applied to 4 places and just was fortunate enough to go 8 rounds and phone interviews at the time when we had these things called, answering machines that you would actually hear the person on the other end of the line instead of it just going directly to your phone. And a gentleman who left me a message while he was leaving, and I picked up the phone, is a gentleman named Mark Tatum, who's now the deputy commissioner of the NBA. He certainly wasn't at that level back then, but he had given a guest lecture at my school my freshman year. So this is now 3 years later that he was calling me. And it just shows the power of showing up and introducing yourself. And this was a course intro to marketing, that I never showed up for because it was 9 in the morning, and in college you can get lazy and you could sleep through early morning classes. And I knew that Mark was with Major League Baseball at the time. And so I went to his class that he was presenting at, and my name got pulled out of a hat. Of all things, 3 people out of 500 students got pulled out to have lunch with him. And when he ended up calling me 3 years later, I referenced that as I picked up the call mid-message that he was leaving, and he pretended like he remembered the conversation that we had at lunch, which I still to this day think he's a BS artist for saying that. But he was one who gave me, shortly after working, what his department was called the Marketing Partnerships Group, where you're basically working on sponsorships. I went over to the team marketing and business operations department. So the NBA was starting a venture, first of any of the leagues, to try and be kind of the marketing facilitator for the NBA teams. And when I say marketing facilitator, probably right now it's so commonplace, but back then the teams in a way saw themselves as almost competitors of one another instead of collaborators. And it didn't make sense because you have 30 different teams. It was less back then before expansion. But these teams were looking at it like they were competitors, even though they were only able to market in their 75-mile radius around their arena, and they should be collaborating and using best practices and sharing with each other. And so that was the impetus for the formation of team marketing and business operations. It was a dream that David Stern, the commissioner we just lost, had. And so, now is where Shauna comes into play. So I was friendly with a number of folks in the team marketing department through my work there. Shauna, you'll remember some of these names like Ralph Nieves Bryant and people like that, and Keith Gordon,
Yep.
and all these people who Shauna knew. And so this is where the funny part of it is, the NBA league office was looked at as part, collaborators and helping the teams. And then the teams kind of also look at us as policemen and women who were like checking up on them and making sure they were doing what they quote needed to do. And that was never the intent of it. But of course, when you're working at a team and you're the one directly working on the product, and you have this like quote big brother, league following up with you, sometimes you feel like your work is being checked. And I think Sean and I got along because we kind of knew the nature of that relationship between the league and the teams. And we kind of just said, hey, it is what it is. Let's just be friends and figure out the best way to make it work for everyone. So that was, hopefully that's helpful in terms of the background of how Shauna and I know each other. And then, when we come full circle, happy to share my particular story. But when I came out sharing my story after what you'll hear is 2.5 years of hell that I went through, Shauna, through social media, I guess, really it shows the power of social media in a positive sense when it can be used positively, reached out. And it's interesting that two people who worked with one another when we were, in our 20s and, having our first jobs in sports, didn't know much about each other, our chemical makeups, our mental health challenges, our daily life challenges, and then to come together later on in life and be like, oh, you deal with that stuff too? Okay. Now we're on the same page. Now there's even more we could talk about. So, that's really where the story comes full circle, at least with Shauna and I.
Hey, Eric, this is Blair Bissonette. I'm helping host the Zoom call today. If you have a presentation that you'd like to share, I can certainly turn the screen over to you, or you're welcome to just begin your presentation for us today, unless anybody has any objections.
No,
Great.
I think great. Eric, what I was hoping you could do for us is just kind of tell us, how did you start We're All a Little Crazy.org and the Same Here movement? I think that's probably the $50,000 question this afternoon.
Sure. So I'll try not to bore you too much with what went into the motivation for it, but I think what went into the motivation is probably as important as the formation story itself, because I wouldn't have arrived at the formation had it not been for the story of what I'd been through and starting to see mental health through a very different lens than I think our society generally sees it right now. I kind of laugh a little bit that today is the beginning of Mental Health Awareness Month, because I almost think it's ridiculous, like, that we even have to have a month for mental health awareness. Like, we don't have a physical health awareness month. Like, we all have mental health. We all deal with challenges. There's no reason for us to have to single it out in a specific month. It should be something that we're talking about all the time. I'll digress on that though, and go back to the story. So I mentioned working, at the league office when I started off, and then was fortunate enough to go on to work for 2 NBA teams and then 2 NHL teams. And I was doing the whole, race that you hear so much about, especially athletes who are on the call. I'm gonna stop in the story and reference specific situations that might resonate with you. Is you've got this myopic focus on what it is that you are doing right now, what your identity is as an individual. So very similarly, like growing up, I was the athlete, right? I played the 3 or 4 sports in high school, depending on if you consider kicking for the football team while playing soccer a 4th sport. Kind of a little jab at myself. And then went on to walk on to the basketball team at Cornell University. But the teams that I mentioned, the league that I mentioned that I worked for was, how do you keep that passion for the sports world going and doing it as a profession? And so, getting involved in sports and then putting my nose to the ground and having this myopic focus on, I want to keep moving on in the industry. I want to take on more responsibility, not in an ego sense perspective, but more in like a career aspirations perspective. The goal was to run a professional sports team and be, the title goes from one or the other. It's either called CEO, Chief Executive Officer, or Team President. And so was fortunate to get all these opportunities to jump from different markets, the Phoenix Suns, and then Chicago and New Jersey with the Devils, and then down to Florida with the Panthers when a new ownership group bought the team. And so that ownership group bought the team and hired 2 of us and kind of emptied out the entire business operations staff and allowed us to build it from scratch. So there was a gentleman named Matt Caldwell, who was their CEO, and I was hired as their CRO, Chief Revenue Officer. So it's kind of his like number 2. And so in terms of like growth and having that myopic focus and thinking my whole identity was caught in being the sports executive, I felt like one step away from that dream job that I ultimately ended up wanting to be, which was running the whole operation. And things were going well. I was enjoying my time down there, living in Las Olas Boulevard, sunny weather, and a team that was starting to get on the up and up with a new ownership group that was willing to spend money and bring in great players. And about 6 months into my tenure there, I just started to notice that I was losing interest for things outside of the office. I wasn't interested in going out and seeing friends, going to the gym, going on dates, pretty much anything socially. And I would come back from work and I would hit the pillow and I would go to sleep and then wake up, rinse, wash, repeat, and start it all over again. And, I justified that those feelings were okay because, again, going back to that concept of a myopic focus, and this is where I hope you all as athletes this can resonate with you, but heed my warning, is that I was able to say to myself, well, my job is the most important thing in my life. Like you all might be saying right now, well, my sport is the most important thing in my life. So it doesn't matter that these other things have gone away. As long as I can focus on my job and get that done at a high level, that's what's important right now. The world must be telling me that I need to focus even more on my job. And so that excuse, because that's what it was, lasted only about 2 weeks. And I woke up one morning and it was like pushing myself at a quickstand out of the bed. I walked over to my closet. There's a lot more room in Florida than there is in New York to get to your closet. So walked over to my closet and felt like I was wearing cinder blocks going into the closet. And I remember looking in the closet, not being able to decipher whether I should wear a button down versus a t-shirt versus a sweatshirt. Hadn't even thought about showering or brushing my teeth. It felt like just this mishmash, like my mind had started to fail me and there was no way that I could make sense of what my actions were expected to be. And, when your mind gets like that, you start to test your mind. And so for me, it was looking at a picture on my counter of my nieces, who are most important people in the world to me. And I could remember their first names and I challenged myself to remember their middle names and it was escaping me. And that scared the crap out of me. I mean, you're never been in a situation like that. And so my hope was if I can get myself together, get in the office, get behind the screen, start to get back into the routine of doing work, like work had been my savior up until that point, all these other things will start coming back and I'll feel fine. And I get in the office, and this might be a game that not many of you are familiar with because it's a game from back in the day, but the computer looked like light brights on my screen, which is a game where it looks like there are just these flashing lights on a board. So I couldn't make sense of any of the emails that were coming in. And my staff was walking around in the office outside of the window where my office was. And it felt like Grand Central Station to me, just bodies moving all over the place without any sense for who was what and where they were going. And it felt like this overwhelm. It felt like my brain was in a cloud. For those who've had a computer that starts to blue screen and you see it kind of, you know, it freezes and all of a sudden, you know, the opportunity to open up new browsers starts to become infinity. They start going up to the left and the side, and you're like, oh my God, this computer's overwhelmed. That's what my brain felt like. I just couldn't put sentences together. And I was fortunate that I had an ownership group that was pretty supportive. My CEO, Matt, who came in, he was a West Point grad, so certainly military background, but the owner was also a West Point grad. And I said to him, you know, Vinny, I don't know what's going on. I'm not being a great employee right now, but more importantly for myself, I'm not even functioning as a human being. And it didn't come out as clearly as that. I was certainly, stammering to be able to talk. And he looked at me in the eyes and he said to me something very comforting. He said, take as much time as you need, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, come back, hit the ground running. We like what's being built here. And so back to this idea of purpose and identity, you know, the way that I identified myself up until that point in my life was like Eric, the sports executive. So my whole MO was, okay, he's giving me 3 months to get back to functional level where I can do this job again. I'm going to go back to New York where my family's from. My rent on my Florida apartment is still due, so I'm going to have to keep paying that. But, what I can do is I can stay at home around family, and I'll take these magic pills that I see on TV where the commercials I've seen are a cartoon commercial with a sad face and a cloud above it. And that sad face with a cloud above it takes a pill, and 15 seconds into taking the pill, the clouds go away and the smile happens and the person becomes happy. So if I was used to this process of taking an antibiotic when I was younger for strep throat and bronchitis and for pneumonia, what was my thought not to believe that I would take this thing called an antidepressant and I would start to feel better? And so I wish that that's how it happened. Unfortunately, what did happen was I ended up spending 2.5 years horizontal, laying in a bed, staring at the ceiling, not watching TV, not listening to the radio because I had no interest in it. And I woke up with what I describe as no original thoughts in my brain. So we take for granted that we wake up and our mind immediately goes to, I'm hungry, or I need to shower, or I've got this email to send, or I got to do this training. When your brain shuts down like that, you wake up with nothing. You're like a vegetable staring at the ceiling. And that was my life for 2.5 years as these doctors, what they call psychopharmacologists, who mix medications, and I didn't know any better. I thought that was the only way towards health. Tried to essentially, give me the magic pill to get me out of it. Over 50 different psychotropic drug combinations, a process called TMS therapy after the 2.5 years where they shoot electromagnetic waves into your brain to try to wake your neurons and your synapses up to start firing. That didn't work, and 23 sessions into that led to the concept of what you here refer to as suicidal ideations. So I was looking at this bottle of pills on my counter, and it felt like a magnetic pull towards that bottle of pills, like I needed to swallow them, and I couldn't stop myself from thinking of that. And so was fortunate enough that I had this rational thinking part of my brain still available and was able to call out for help and went to what was supposed to be the top treatment facility in the Northeast, which is Cornell Med in New York City. And they transferred me to their Westchester facility. And I meet with this attending psychiatrist, again, who's supposed to be this expert in the field. And she looks at my chart and she looks at all that I've tried in the last 2.5 years. And her response to me, which I will never forget because it's ingrained in me as one of the reasons why I started this organization, was, Eric, you've tried everything there is. Your last resort is to do shock therapy. And when I say that, most people, take a sigh and they say, shock therapy, wow, that's awful. the bigger thing to me was that she said last resort. Because I don't think that anyone, especially y'all being athletes on the phone, if you're being told you can do something, whatever that something is, to take control over how you're feeling for your knee, your leg, your ankle, your shoulder, you're going to do it. If you got to sit in an ice bath you have before, you're going to do it. And so to hear this was my last resort, I believed her, and I thought that that was going to be the case. And so I did 12 sessions of shock therapy where they put electrodes on your brain, put you under general anesthesia, and shock you into seizure to try and wake your brain back up. It's essentially trying to like turn a computer off and then hope that if you turn the computer back on again, it's going to start working again. Not surprisingly, that didn't work. And so I left the hospital feeling no better after those treatments than I had the 2.5 years prior, retreating back to this twin bed I was staying in from childhood, thinking that there was no path towards improvement. And that's where the story starts to turn. I met a woman who was friendly with my parents and practices what's called integrative psychology. And I didn't know what the word integrative meant. I just knew that she treated differently than most doctors. And so I met with her, and first question she asked me, which was different than all the other practitioners I had been through, was, Eric, can you please tell me what your life has been like? All the other practitioners I had been to, the first question was, Eric, what are your symptoms? And then based on my symptoms, they had some kind of relief or magic pill for me that was going to fix me. She didn't want to know what my symptoms were. She wanted to know what had gone on in my life. And so it shows how naive I was at the time. I didn't know where to begin. So, you know, where do you begin when someone says to tell them about your life? So I said, I'm in the middle of 3 boys. We're a sports crazed family. You know, watch sports, play sports. Okay, you're the middle of 3 boys, so tell me about your older brother. And so I just start sharing my life. I mean, I didn't know that this was any different than what other people had gone through because I only have one life, and this is how my life started at such a young age. So from the time I was 8 years old, moving on for the next 20 years, my older brother broke his femur bone in a sporting accident. The largest bone in his body just cracked in half, and was in a body cast for a year and was homeschooled. So you figure out a lot of people go through injuries like that. So I didn't think much of it. And then he gets diagnosed a month later after his cast comes off with something called ALL, a children's form of leukemia. And so goes through chemo and radiation. Back then it took much longer. It was a 5-year period. And after 5 years, again, miracle happens. He goes into remission and the cancer has left his body. A month after that, it was almost like it was a pattern of time. He's in a Jeep Wrangler with his friends, no back to and no top to the Jeep, and there's no seatbelts in the back. Car loses control. My brother flies out of the back, lands on his head, cracks his head open, loses partial vision in his eye, is in ICU for a month. Finally heals from that, goes to college, junior year of college. He's feeling a pain in his knee. They do all this testing. They finally do blood tests. They figure out that his cancer's come back, same form he has as a child. And now they have to give him a stronger chemo regimen. It's 10 years later, so they have stronger chemo drugs, but they really want to knock it out of the system because it's very dangerous if it comes back yet another time. So the chemo is working in terms of knocking the cancer out, but it's really breaking his body down because cancer, unfortunately, isn't so targeted where it only attacks the bad cells. And so his body goes into a major temperature. He develops 105, and my parents bring him into the hospital, and he develops what's called septic shock, where your organs start attacking themselves, and your body just starts shutting down, and that sent him into a coma. And so he lived in that coma with a tube breathing for him for 3 months. And we didn't know back then, especially with the way neurology was, we didn't know if he'd wake or if he'd have any brain activity. And if he did have any brain activity, whether or not, he'd be able to speak to us. But again, miracle, he wakes after 3 months. He's got his full faculties about him. But we find out that his kidneys have failed from the rigor of the septic shock. And now he needs to go on dialysis, waiting for a kidney transplant from someone in our family. And we all get tested. My father ends up being the closest match. My father donates a kidney to him. And again, we finally feel like we're in the clear. Everything's fine. That next year following that, 3 of my close friends in their 20s unexpectedly all pass away from heart conditions. One on a treadmill as his wife was 6 weeks pregnant. We came to find out and miraculously had the baby. People ask the story. My brother's well now, considering all he's been through, living in Long Island, has 2 girls and is a lawyer. But what I explained in that story, what this woman shared with me was, Eric, you front row seat for all of these traumatic and stressful events. Do you realize what happened in your system? And I said, no. And I think for you athletes out there, you'll understand this analogy. She said, I want you to picture, instead of watching a basketball game, you're watching a wrestling match. And the wrestling match from a front row seat was your brother making a move every time to try and stay alive, every time something happened to him. And your friends trying to make a move to stay alive from collapsing from these heart conditions. And instead of it just being a regular wrestling match, it's a muddy wrestling match. It's a muddy pit. And you being seated in that front row, every move that's being made, this mud is hitting you and hitting on your body and sticking on your clothes and hardening there. And essentially what's being done is you're not taking a proverbial shower. You don't know any better. You're just sitting there in this front row seat because you don't know to take a shower, because you don't know what practices and exercises move these experiences that you've watched and the way they've dirtied you out of your system. So my immediate reaction to her was, Don, I get what you're saying, that I watched these things happen to my brother and my friends, but they didn't happen to me directly. So if you're saying, even if they don't happen to us directly, if we watch traumatic things happen to other people in our lives that we care about and they can affect our mental health, well, forget about my story for a second. Between job losses and breakups and divorces and bullying and cyberbullying and verbal abuse and sexual abuse and sickness of loved ones and loss of loved ones, and the list goes on and on. I'll keep going if you want, but I don't know that there's a person in this world that hasn't been through one or some of those things with people in their lives. And that's an impossibility. That's what the human condition is. So if my mental health was impacted, granted it was to a greater level, who in this world's mental health wasn't impacted? And she kind of looked at me with this stage type of smile and she said, Eric, I believe that. I'm an integrative practitioner. And now I finally learned what integrative meant. It meant that there's this whole mind-body connection and that the things that happen to us in this world impact our entire system. And she said, listen, I love where you're going with this. You can't save the world, though, until you save yourself. Can we get you healthy first? So she sends me to this weekend breathing course called The Art of Living. And I show up to this karate studio, and I'm the only male. I'm the only one under 40 at the time. I'm the only one born in this country. So it's me and 8 Indian women and 9 yoga mats. And talk about like taking a leap of faith. I had to say, I'm a fish out of water here, but I'm going to learn what I need to learn to get better. And so they taught us this thing called the Sudaharshan Kriya, right? It comes out of India. It's a way to stimulate this breath in your body. And essentially what I took out of it, this isn't the way that they would explain it, but if all of us were sitting in the same room together and a truck crashed through, lost control and crashed through either a window or a wall in our room, we would all make this sound right now. And we'd be in shock that that just happened. Some of us would run to the car to try to help the person. Some of us would run away from the car or the truck because we were scared that it was going to keep coming after us. But the main thing is we wouldn't be breathing the way that we, quote, normally do because we were shocked by this experience. Well, guess what? Every single time I was experiencing all those things with my brother and my friends, I was making that gasp. I was expecting the worst thing to happen. And it didn't just happen when those things happened to my brother. It happened in between all those things happening, because once your central nervous system gets wired for something bad might happen, you continue to breathe that way, bracing yourself for the worst experience. So you take this into real life now and you say, hey, what about parents who have children in school who are getting bullied? Don't they go to work every day fearing that their children might self-harm or that their children might get bullied and come home crying? What about the child who has a parent who's got a major illness? Is the child going to school every day thinking about my parent might get further and further sick and might pass away? Of course those things happen. If I have a coach or a teacher that's verbally abusive and every time I come in for a practice or for school, they're on top of me, am I bracing myself for that every single day? Of course. And so all those things are examples of that truck coming through the wall all the time. So if we're not breathing properly, we've got this nerve in our neck. It's the largest nerve in our body. It goes from the top of our neck all the way down to our stomach. There's 2 branches of it. It's called the vagus nerve. And that vagus nerve, it's the superhighway that tells the rest of the nerves in our body how to react. Well, guess what? If the car or the truck is always coming through the wall, or we're always expecting it coming through the wall, we're not breathing properly. And when we're not breathing properly, we're telling the rest of our body, you are in a difficult situation right now where you don't have the ability to concentrate on anything other than being ready if that car comes through the window. So what did that look like for me? When I played basketball out in the streets or out at a park and an ambulance would run by, my immediate thought was that ambulance is going to my house. I got to brace myself for when I get home for thinking that something happened to someone in my family. And I want you all to think about that when you're playing a sport, when you're catching a ball, when you're running, when you're skating, whatever it is your sport that you're doing, and you, quote, mess up. Are you messing up because tactically you did something wrong? Potentially. But are you also messing up because potentially there are these other things on your mind, things from your past that have gotten in the way? So I did this course for 30 days. And I remember waking up one day and I looked at the TV and I was like, oh my God, I want to turn the TV on. This is an amazing feeling. I haven't felt this for 2.5 years. And oh my God, I want to eat breakfast today. I'm actually interested in breakfast. And so started after doing this practice, all things, just a breathing practice to relax that vagus nerve in my neck and send the right messages to my body started to normalize in a healthy, natural way. And so I went to social media. Shauna might remember this, but it was a little bit back in the day. And it was 2007, and there was no Kevin Love article. There was no DeMar DeRozan article to go off of. So I wrote this thing that took 35 minutes to read. And it was all these details of all this shit that I'd been through for the last 2.5 years. And I put my telephone number on the top. And what I got back in responses was unbelievable. There was 150,000 people that read this thing in 3 days. And in those 3 days, I had over 400 calls from as far as China with people asking me, what did I do to get better? And sharing with me, not their disorder. No one was saying, I have PTSD or I have bipolar or I have schizophrenia or depression. Everyone was sharing a life experience they had been through, the loss of a loved one, the sickness of a loved one, a bad divorce, and now how they were feeling relative to how I was feeling and how there were some similarities there. And just begging me to learn whether it was the breathing practice or other things I could teach them to help them get better. And so where my mind went to, and this is going to go to the formation of the organization, and we could ask some questions afterwards. I won't go too deep into the organization itself until there are questions on it. But I went to the largest nonprofit for mental health in our country. And I said, why was it that I was an athlete for all these years? I worked on my body to get myself in my best physical shape, but I went through all these things with my brother and my friends, and I had no idea to work on my mental health. And why is it that these 400 people are calling me and they haven't been to a doctor, they haven't gotten help? Yeah, you hear this term stigma thrown around, all that stuff, but that can't be the whole thing. There's got to be something wrong with the messages that are out there that are preventing people instead of encouraging people to go get help. And here's what I realized by going to all these major nonprofit websites around our country and these government agencies is that they were replicas of each other. In trying to have an intention to help people get help, I actually think they were moving people further away from getting help. And especially folks like you are high performance athletes who have a perfectionist attitude, who think I can get through everything. The messages that I'm about to describe that were on all these websites, there's no way these messages resonated with you because they didn't resonate with me. So the first thing is all the websites had the same stat on the top, which is 1 in 5 people are mentally ill. As a marketer, that was extremely problematic because my immediate question went, well, if 1 in 5 people are mentally ill, what do we call this other group of 4 in 5 people next to them who aren't mentally ill? Are we calling them healthy, okay, fine, and normal? Because if we're doing that, we're doing them a disservice because they have no idea what the hell mental health or mental illness means other than these disorders that this 1 in 5 people live in. And none of us are thinking we're in this disorder place, so we tune out this mental health message. The second thing was all their campaigns to try to get people to actually do something about their mental health was an action word followed by stigma. So stop the stigma, erase the stigma. I found that problematic because if the three of us who are on this call, four of us with Blair are on this call, if we had an organization like athLEDA and we said, you know what, we're going to put a message out there telling people to stop the stigma. Well, there's four of us, five of us behind that message, and that message is going out into the marketplace, and we're essentially telling a group of people, you people who are stigmatizing these poor people who are going through something, you need to stop, stomp, erase doing that. That's not going to bring people together. That's going to push people further apart. That's going to further this narrative that there's two buckets, the sick people and the healthy people who are stigmatizing the sick people. And I noticed that with my brother when he went through cancer. The campaign that made everyone understand that we can work together around cancer was everyone knows someone affected. And so I thought we needed something that was more of a rallying cry. And then the final piece that I saw was the way that all these athletes and celebrities had their stories shared. They had them shared through the media, that is a tabloid media with paparazzi, and the nonprofits were saying, look, good news, Britney Spears has depression also, so celebrities go through it. Or Lindsay Lohan, she has anxiety also, so celebrities go through it. But the problem was the way the tabloid media was telling the stories, they were telling the far end of the spectrum salacious stories. So when you heard about Britney Spears' depression, you also showed a picture of her shaving her head and looking like she was this, quote, freak, right? That's the way they called her. Or Lindsay Lohan showing up to a party, she has anxiety, but the fake eyebrows that she's putting on, she doesn't know how to put them on and they look ridiculous on her face. Or Charlie Sheen has addiction, and those addiction problems are actually making it so that he has to take cocaine in the morning to get himself up in the morning. So you now combine these three messages, the 1 in 5, meaning that the 4 and 5 are completely pushed out and not paying attention to the message. The stop the stigma, essentially protecting the 1 in 5, but telling everyone else in society, you might be a piece of stigmatizing these poor people. And then hearing about what does it mean to be in the 1 in 5? It means that you shave your head, you don't know how to dress properly, and you need to do lines of coke in order to get up in the morning. Well, then who the hell in society is going to go get mental health help? Because we're basically telling people that mental health is not these similar things like having a difficult time waking up in the morning, not being able to pick out your shirt, having a fuzzy brain when you go into the office, going into practice and not feeling your best, having your mind clouded when you go to catch a pass. And so that was the impetus for forming the organization. We're all a little crazy in quotes, the A upside down in the logo, to show that we're making fun of the word crazy by saying we're all a little piece of this. There's no such thing as normal. And then from there, our campaign, it was mentioned before that the campaign is the Same Here campaign. Same Here is an American Sign Language sign where your thumb is pointed at your chest, your 3 middle fingers are curled like a fist, and your pinky is pointed out at the other person, and you're gesturing between the two of you. And you're saying, hey, Shauna, not I have anxiety, you have anxiety, or I have depression, you have depression. It's saying, I face challenges in my life, you face challenges in your life. That's an inevitable part of being a human. If we all face challenges, there should be no shame in us talking about it. And the more we talk about it, the more we'll realize by sharing the stories of celebrities, by sharing the stories of everyday people, by then using that sign, we all go through this. It's not one-offs. It's not 1 in 5. It's 5 in 5. And that should allow us to eventually get to the point where everyone is thinking about, working on, helping themselves with their mental health. And so hopefully that background is helpful as, you all are athletes and you're thinking about this. Don't think about mental health as this thing of, oh, I have to work on this so I don't develop this thing called depression. Or the opposite side of it, I don't have depression yet, so I don't have to work on that. That would be the equivalent of you saying, I don't need to train my legs because there's no chance that I'm going to tear my ACL or strain my MCL. But if that happens, then I'll do something about it. Or I'm not going to eat well because I'm never going to put weight on and I'm never going to get heart disease. So if that eventually develops, then I'll start worrying about it. We're thinking about mental health in such a backwards way. We're thinking about it as if we thought about physical health the way that I just described, waiting for disorder to arise. And we need to be more proactive. The positive side of it is you'll be better athletes when you think about it that way. You'll be clear-minded, you'll be better performers, and you're going to be able to attack whether it's your sport in a better way or whether it's what you do in life in a better way you'll be able to attack it in a more balanced way, and you'll be a lot clearer in what your purpose is, what your mission is, and what your desire is moving forward. So hopefully that's helpful. I know I spoke for a while, but I didn't want to go too long to where I went to the end of the hour. We didn't have time for questions and stuff like that.
Yeah, Eric, that was, I was mentioning to Shauna, speechless. I'm not helping people right now. You've overcome a lot, man. And I know we were getting to know each other a little bit last Sunday, but I'll tell you the biggest question we probably have, and then I'd love for everyone on the call to use the chat feature to ask questions, and I can kind of moderate them to Eric since he is on his cell, is where would people start? If they begin to find that they're in a situation or in an experience where some of these symptoms that you described are coming to light, or maybe they have a dear friend, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a significant other, where would you tell them to start reaching out first?
Sure. So I'd actually take a step before that, John, which is, why wait for a symptom to arise for us to do something, right? And I hope that's not that unfair that I'm answering the question that way.
No, it's
right?
fair. Totally fair.
So we should be starting to work on these things before symptoms arise. Like, one of the reasons why I do the work that I do and I form what I form is I don't want anyone to ever have to go through the shit that I went through, right? And looking back, there were certainly signs that I probably didn't recognize. But I think that the best time to work on our health of any kind, like, you don't start going to the gym and running for heart health because you're having pain in your chest and a pain in your jaw and your neck, and so that makes you decide, I want to work the plaque out of my arteries. We learn when we're in elementary school this thing called jump rope for heart, with a picture of a beautiful, heart that's a cartoon jumping a rope, and that teaches us at a young age that we have to be getting out there and getting our heart rate up. So when you say where would you start, it's interesting because where our society is right now, especially in the U.S., for everyone who's domestic here, there's this concept of mental health of like, oh, the place that I start is with a psychiatrist, right? Because that's the doctor at the highest level that I can get the help from. I don't believe that that's the first place that you start. I believe the first place that you start is you want to start to get things out of your system. So we call the practices STAR, stress and trauma, active release and rewiring, okay? And practices is probably the wrong word for it. We're changing it to exercises. So if you hear that term again, STAR, stress and trauma, the thing that builds up on us, active, meaning we're doing something active to get it out of our system. We can't just sit there. We can't wait in bed waiting for a pill to kick in, releasing and rewiring. And so my challenge to people in terms of where to start is first acknowledging that I'm part of this 5 and 5 group, right? If we ourselves are taking a look at a great way that we're trying to live life, and we're saying I'm not part of that 1 and 5 group, well, we're never going to start anything. So it's the acceptance first off of looking back on my life and thinking, what are the things that might have affected me as I grew up? And I do this with 2nd through 5th graders when I go through elementary school. And if they have things that they all raise their hands for, we all have things that we raise our hands for, right? Sure. So again, it's growing up with a single parent household. How was that difficult comparing yourself to other kids? It's the family member that passed away at a young age, right? It's all these things that we have lived through. Identify that. Okay, once you've identified that, now it's this comfort level. I would say the first step before we talk any about the practices is sharing. Now, people are comfortable with different levels of sharing. So I'll give you the easiest way to share, where if you don't feel like openly sharing with anyone, first piece of it is getting it out of your brain and putting it down on a piece of paper. Hayden Hurst, who's a first-round pick for the Baltimore Ravens and now just got traded to the Atlanta Falcons, he carries around a journal with him because he's not a very outward person when it comes to sharing, but he writes the stuff that's going on in his head down in a paper. I wish someone had told me that when I was at a young age, because I just allowed the stuff to circle and circle and circle. And guess what happens when it circles? It causes more of the stress and trauma to build in our system. So hopefully that's a good answer to your question, is it's a starting point towards allowing ourselves to understand that we need to almost take it, the visual is taking it from this silver tray where it's in our brain, the stuff that's taking up a lot of space, and literally handing that silver tray over either to the journal that we have, to the one friend we're able to open up and talk to, or if we're open to it, to the psychologist who's willing to talk to us about our life and to share what we're going through.
That's awesome. You're be proactive. Let's be in front of it, and let's share with each other rather than react to the symptom that we might face down the road if we're not.
And not allow it to live and spiral. Like I thought at a young age, erroneously, what is a psychologist going to do for me? Like
right.
I know my brain better than anyone else. I'm in my own head all the time. What could they possibly say to me that I don't already know it about myself? But what I didn't know, and I wish I knew back then, is the releasing and the rewiring that I described with STAR. You literally need to think of therapy like I'm allowing this air that's filled up in my balloon to start to seep out and to not take up as much space as it did before. That's what putting it out there does. It creates, you hear the app Headspace, you're creating more headspace by putting it out there.
Beautiful. Let me ask you a big question that's come in, and we may have time for one more after this. As many of us who work in sports, all include high-performing athletes, those on the front lines. But you think about the way an athlete is perceived, the way those in sports are perceived as superheroes, and they are in so many ways. We're going to be expected to kind of lead this comeback from COVID-19, from this pandemic. How can we, within the organizations that we are in, balance the pressure with making sure that mental health and well-being of the people around us, our employees, our friends, is really considered? So what do you think we could do, Eric, to kind of be that voice, be that friend, be that person that validates the way everyone is going to come out of this pandemic as those who lead and expect to be leaders as high performers and sports professionals?
Yeah, it's a great question, because obviously as athletes and professionals, you have platforms that people are going to listen to you. And so, I joked about this with you the other day, and I think Sean as well. I saw a Wall Street Journal article about 2 days ago that said, we surveyed, thousands of people, and we had 1/3 of people admitted that being in quarantine affects their mental health. And I wanted to shake the screen when I read it, because I was thinking to myself, who the hell lives in quarantine for 6 weeks and says their mental health wasn't impacted, right? It's either people that are denying what's going on, or they don't know what mental health means. No one's asking someone to admit, I spent 6 weeks in quarantine, therefore I now have this thing called mental illness, or I now have this thing called PTSD. That's not what we're saying. The question that was asked to them was my mental health impacted? And still only 1/3 of the people said that, right? And so what I say to everyone who's on the call is, you went from a place where, well, 3 things happened to you. One, you dealt with the immediacy of the what if questions. This is bucket 1 of, what if I get sick from COVID? What if my family members get sick? What if I go to a hospital? What if my sport never comes back? So that's bucket 1. If you could deal with those questions on repeat for 6 weeks and not have your mental health affected, I'd love to meet that person, because I want to literally inject their blood into mine, right? So that's bucket 1. Bucket number 2 is, bucket number 2 is, we all have routine that we're used to. And that routine is stuff that makes us who we are and gives us identity and purpose. So I am the track star. I am the speed skater. I am the basketball player. When that routine gets taken away from us and we can't do those things, I spoke with a professional tennis player yesterday. He's like, I'm sitting in my house. I can't pick up my racket and hit with anyone. It's making me go insane, and not in the literal sense, but, making me go insane. So we've got bucket number 2 is loss of routine, which creates loss of purpose and loss of identity. Then you've got bucket number 3, which is, because of all of my my distractions going away, my practice, my sports that I watch, my going to restaurants, my meeting my friends, guess what's starting to happen? All the stuff from our past that we were able to just push to the back and say, I don't want to deal with it, I don't want to deal with it, those things have started to come to the surface. And now that they've started to come to the surface, they've created what I call this black hole. So you combine those 3 buckets and we're all floating in this black hole. By the way, most of us just blaming it on bucket 1, which is I'm scared of getting, can promise you it's not the upper floating in this black hole. It's all 3 of those things. So using that explanation to share with your followers, your fans, your fellow athletes to say, I was in a place during that 6-week period where these 3 things affected me. And now to get back to being in a better place, okay, the fear of COVID has come down. That's helped me, number 1. Number 2, I found routine where I didn't have it before, where I'm in a practice schedule now. I'm eating at certain times now. I have a goal of believing my sport is going to be back by this time, so I'm getting myself ready for that. That gives me purpose and identity back. And by the way, these things that were coming to the surface, I found ways, again, we're not going to get time to get into the STAR practices, but breathing practices, yogas, meditations, just journaling things out, like we were mentioning before, just talking things out is giving me an opportunity to actually work on those things that I know now are inside of me and aren't serving me, that they're actually taking me away from performing the best that I can in sport. If you're providing those messages to the everyday people, they're going to hear you as a leader and they're going to say, I got it. That's what mental health is. That's what's been impacting me. I can now feel okay about working on myself without thinking I have to raise my hand and admit I have this thing called mental illness. I need to go to the doctor and get diagnosed. It's more the acknowledgement and knowing that we're working on things now that this COVID thing is starting to hopefully come to a close.
Wow, absolutely. Hey, Eric, I know we're just about a minute before we've got to jump off this call, but I was wondering if we could have you either share with me personally or with the folks that were on the invite, if you've got a 1 sheet or a link or a video on how you are recommending folks manage and lead and support others through end of this pandemic and on to the next phase of what new normal looks like, which will not be what was before we entered COVID-19. So the creation of the new normal is a big part of this, and the embracing of change is another part. Thank you.
Yeah, what I'll send you all is, my pleasure. I'll send you the list of those 3 buckets, and then I'll send you a link to the STAR practices, which help explain how you, the nice thing is, even though those are 3 unique buckets, these practices help work with all of them.
Absolutely.
So yeah, definitely love to do that.
And listen, hey, we'll have you come back on. Let's look at perhaps like a June or a early July and have you check in with us. We'll certainly engage in your movement, the hashtag #SameHere movement, and see how we can do more from athLEDA and your nonprofit to make this story well known, validated, supported, and empowered. Thank you so much today, Eric. We appreciate it.
And I'm sorry for commandeering so much time, but tried to fit a lot in a short time.
It's a lot. It's power packed. And again, thank you for being brave and fierce and sharing it with us.
My pleasure.
All right.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks for being on the call. Thanks for being a part of this story with Eric. And please make time to make mental health matter. Have a great weekend, all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your pleasure.